The Grand Archive of the Concordance was less a library and more a mausoleum of fact. It was a silent, cold place where history came to be interred, catalogued, and occasionally mourned. Kalen, a Signian of the third scholarly caste, had spent the better part of his 70 cycles within its hallowed, climate-controlled halls. His long, six-fingered hands were made for the delicate work of handling data crystals and interfacing with the deep core terminals, and his species' inherent patience was a virtue in a place where a single query could take days to process through millennia of records. He believed in the sanctity of the archive, in the immutable truth of a recorded event. History, once written, was stone. It could be interpreted, but never changed. It was this belief that was slowly, quietly beginning to crumble. The first crack appeared in the file of Grolnak the Flayer, a Cathar warlord whose campaign of terror across the Spinward Marches had been a subject of Kalen's own doctoral thesis. He remembered the record's vividly censor logs of civilian ships being vented to space, encrypted communications boasting of planetary subjugation, and sworn testimonies from the few survivors of the Viridian massacre. It was a file stained with the digital blood of billions. Yet, when he pulled it for a cross-reference check, the file was clean. According to the updated, official Concordance record, Warlord Grolnak had not been a warlord at all, but a minor provincial governor who had retired due to failing health and died peacefully in his sleep, surrounded by his progeny. The Viridian massacre was listed as a catastrophic meteor shower. The civilian ships had suffered from critical drive failures. The history he knew, the history he had personally cataloged, was gone. Kalen's first instinct was to assume a clerical error, a data stream corruption of colossal proportions. He filed a report with his superior, Master Archivist Pleam, a portly Apollonian whose primary function was to ensure the archive's bureaucracy ran smoother than its search algorithms. Plem had dismissed it with a wave of a fleshy appendage. The deep cores are infallible. Kalen, your memory is the variable. Perhaps you are misremembering the details. The Cathar are a brutish people. It is easy to conflate one's atrocities with another's. But Kalen knew he wasn't mistaken. The cold certainty of it settled deep in his gut. This wasn't an error. It was a forgery, so seamless and complete that it had overwritten the very bedrock of the archive. Using his own clearance codes, which were far more extensive than Pliam suspected, he began a clandestine audit. He searched not for Grolnak, but for others like him, pirates, slavers, corrupt officials who had used the Concordance's labyrinthine legal system to escape justice. He found dozens. A Nephilim syndicate boss, known for weaponizing engineered plagues, was now remembered as a celebrated philanthropist who had pioneered viral cures. A triumvirate admiral who had deliberately sacrificed a colony world to protect his fleet's position was now a decorated hero who had died saving it. Each file was a masterpiece of fabrication, complete with forged commendations, altered censor logs, and even fabricated personal journals. It was a systematic erasure of evil, a great revision that was silently spreading through the galaxy's memory. A chilling pattern began to emerge. Every single figure whose history had been sanitized had one thing in common: they had, in some way, harmed humanity. The connection was undeniable. Grolnak the Flayer had been secretly funded by corporate entities that profited from raiding human colonies. The Nephilim Syndicate had tested its bioweapons on the outer settlements of the Sol system. The Triumvirate Admiral had abandoned the human colony of Haven, leaving its 10 million inhabitants to be glassed by raiders, an event the Admiral had dismissed as the regrettable cost of maintaining strategic stability. Kalen remembered the human delegation's plea before the Concordance. They had presented evidence, begged for intervention, and were met with platitudes and procedural delays. The concordance, ever fearful of upsetting the delicate balance of power, had done nothing. Soon after, humanity had withdrawn from most diplomatic channels, their ambassadors recalled, their trade agreements left to wither. They were branded as isolationists, an emotional and petulant species incapable of understanding the nuances of galactic politics. They had also been sanctioned for developing what the concordance termed mnemonic corruption technology, a theoretical data plague capable of targeting and erasing specific information within both digital and organic minds. The humans had claimed it was a defensive deterrent, a way to protect their own history and culture. The concordance had called it a weapon of informational terror and demanded they cease all research. The humans, it seemed, had not listened. Armed with this dreadful hypothesis, Kalen approached Master Archivist Plim a second time. He laid out the pattern, the impossible coincidences, the connection to humanity's grievances. Plim's jovial demeanor vanished, replaced by a cold, reptilian fear. "You will drop this," he commanded, his voice barely a whisper. The record is the record. To suggest it can be altered from the outside is tantamount to heresy. It would undermine the very foundation of concordance authority. Do you understand what you are alleging? That a fringe species has the power to rewrite our collective reality? It is absurd and dangerous. Your access to the deep cores is suspended pending a review of your stability. Kalen was locked out, but it was too late. He had seen the ghost in the machine, and he could not unsee it. He returned to his private workstation, a relic by archive standards but firewalled from the main network, and began the real work. He didn't need deep core access to analyze the fragments he had already downloaded. He designed a diagnostic program, a digital sieve, to search for the fingerprints of the forger. For weeks, he worked, fueled by stimulants and a growing sense of dread. He felt like a man trying to map a coastline during an earthquake. Finally, he found it. It wasn't code in any traditional sense. It was a ghost signal, a quantum entangled algorithm that existed within the faint, residual energy of the archive's own processing streams. It had no single point of origin. It was everywhere at once. It was a parasite living in the galaxy's central nervous system. He called it the cipher of judgment. The moment his diagnostic program made contact, the cipher responded. It wasn't a hack or an attack. It was an invitation. His screen went black, and then a stream of raw, unmediated data flooded his senses. It was a life, downloaded and laid bare. The life of Prefect Valerius of the Core Worlds, a respected diplomat known for his impassioned speeches on unity and cooperation. But the cipher showed Kalen the truth, the backroom deals, the untraceable transfers of funds from relief aid accounts to arms manufacturers, the quiet orders that led to the accidental deaths of his political rivals. The cipher showed Kalen irrefutable proof that Valerius had personally approved the sale of defective shield generators to a human agricultural outpost, fully aware that the system's star was entering a volatile flare cycle. He had profited from the inevitable disaster, which was officially recorded as a tragic natural phenomenon. As the data stream ended, a live feed appeared in the corner of Kalen's monitor. It was Prefect Valerius, alive and well, delivering a speech at the Concordance Assembly. He was speaking about the importance of shared truth and historical integrity. Kalen watched, his 3 hearts pounding in his chest, a cold sweat beading on his brow. He was witnessing a silent, cosmic trial. The cipher was both prosecutor and judge, and he, Kalen, was the jury. As Valerius reached the crescendo of his speech, his eyes widened in sudden, abject terror. He clutched his chest, a strangled gasp escaping his lips, and collapsed behind the podium. Pandemonium erupted in the assembly hall. Medics rushed to the stage, but Kalen knew it was useless. He wasn't just watching a broadcast, he was watching an execution. The cipher had overloaded the prefect's neural implants, inducing a fatal cerebral event so perfectly simulated it would fool any coroner. The go signal in Kalen's terminal pulsed once, and a single, stark white word appeared on the black screen, written in a human script he instantly recognized. It said, "Redacted." Kalen leaned back in his chair, the silence of his small office suddenly vast and suffocating. The archive was a mausoleum, and he had just met its ghost. He was no longer just a historian. He was a witness. And the most terrifying part was the chilling, undeniable certainty that he hadn't discovered the cipher by accident. It had allowed itself to be found. It wanted him to watch. The word on the screen, "redacted," was not an answer. It was a branding. It burned itself into Kalen's mind, a sigil of a power so absolute it could not only end a life but also edit the reason for its existence. For the next 3 rotations, Kalen lived in a state of hyper-vigilant dread. He scrubbed his workstation, not of the cipher's trace an impossible task, like trying to scrub a shadow from a wall, but of his own diagnostic programs. He reinstated the firewall, deleted his private logs, and returned to his official duties with a feigned, hollow diligence. He cataloged shipping manifests from the Outer Rim, cross-referenced stellar cartography updates, and dutifully ignored the gaping holes in the fabric of history that only he could see. Every interaction with a colleague was a performance. He was the same quiet, meticulous archivist, yet inside he was a man screaming in a soundproof room. Master Archivist Pleam, mollified by Kalen's apparent return to normalcy, restored his deep core access with a patronizing speech about the dangers of overwork and intellectual obsession. Kalen accepted the admonishment with a bowed head, the gesture of submission tasting like ash in his mouth. The official cause of Prefect Valerius's death was ruled as a rare, aggressive neurovascular collapse, a 1 in a billion anomaly. The concordance mourned him as a visionary, and Kalen watched the sanitized eulogies, knowing the truth of the invisible bullet that had been fired from the past to strike the present. His isolation was absolute until the arrival of Inquisitor Lorna Vash. Vash was a Vexian, a species known for their crystalline logic and an unnerving lack of any discernible emotion. She moved with a liquid grace that was at odds with her rigid, formal bearing, her multifaceted eyes taking in every detail of the archive with a disconcerting intensity. She was not a bureaucrat like Pleam. She was an instrument of concordant security, and her presence in the quiet halls of history meant that the official story of Valerius's death was not as settled as the public believed. Vash's investigation was a model of cold efficiency. She did not ask about Valerius directly. Instead, she began by requesting all data access logs for the archive's primary servers in the cycle preceding the prefect's death. Pleam, flustered and eager to cooperate, handed them over without question. Kalen knew his own unauthorized deep core searches would be in those logs, a glaring anomaly that would lead Vash directly to his workstation. He braced for the inevitable summons, but it never came. He checked the logs himself from a secondary terminal and found, to his astonishment, that his activity had been seamlessly woven into routine system maintenance protocols. The cipher was protecting him, tucking him under its spectral wing. This realization was not comforting. It was terrifying. It meant the cipher's interest in him was not a fleeting impulse. It was a plan. Vash, undeterred by the clean logs, changed her approach. She began interviewing senior archivist, her questions precise and unsettling. She asked about data degradation, about the theoretical possibility of quantum state data manipulation, about any historical files that had recently required significant re-verification. Pliem dismissed her theories as fantastical, but Kalen could see the flicker of recognition in Vash's unblinking gaze. She was a bloodhound on a scent she couldn't yet name, but she knew the trail was real. Eventually, she came for Kalen. She didn't summon him to an interrogation room. She appeared at his workstation, a silent shadow materializing in his periphery. "Archivist Kalen," she stated, her voice a low, resonant hum, devoid of inflection. "Your doctoral thesis was on the Grolnok campaigns, a subject of considerable historical revision, I believe." Kalen's blood ran cold. History is always in revision. Inquisitor, new evidence comes to light. Vash's multifaceted eyes seemed to peer through his skull. "And sometimes," she countered, "old evidence simply vanishes. You filed a report concerning the Grolnok file, citing a data stream corruption. You later rescinded that report. Why?" Kalen forced himself to meet her gaze, his mind racing, calling upon his encyclopedic knowledge of archive procedure. "Master Archivist Pliem was correct. My recollection was flawed. I had conflated Grolnok's record with that of a contemporary warlord from the same sector, a regrettable but understandable error for a scholar lost in his work. It was a plausible lie, reinforced by Pliem's own official dismissal." Vash remained silent for a long moment, processing his response. "An error," she finally repeated, the word hanging in the air like a judgment. "You are considered the most precise historian of your generation, archivist. You do not make errors of that magnitude, yet you are, I have noted, exceptionally diligent. Keep up your good work." She turned and walked away, her silence more accusatory than any shout. He had passed the test, but he knew he was now a primary suspect in a crime that had no name. That night, as he sat in his darkened office, the cipher returned. There was no fanfare, no dramatic takeover of his systems, just a quiet chime and a text chat interface opening on his screen. The cursor blinked, waiting. Kalen stared at it, his hands trembling. He did not type. A moment later, a voice filled the room, not from his speakers, but from the very air around him. A synthesized yet distinctly human voice, calm and measured. "Inquisitor Vash is intelligent, but she is looking for a weapon. She thinks in terms of code, viruses, and brute force attacks. She cannot conceive of a ghost." Kalen found his voice, though, a dry whisper. "What are you? Who are you?" The voice paused. "We are the librarians. We do not burn books. We correct them. You were chosen, Kalen, because you love the truth. You revere it. You are a priest in a temple of fact. But your temple has been desecrated by liars for centuries. We are merely sweeping up." A new file appeared on Kalen's screen. It was an access request for the Concordance's most secure financial archives, a level of clearance far beyond even Vash's. It requested the complete transactional history of Baron Hester of the Zephyr Syndicate. "Why me?" Kalen asked, his eyes fixed on the request. Why show me this? The voice, which Kalen now thought of as Elias, was patient. Because a verdict requires a witness. We are the judge. We are the executioner. But you, archivist, you are the conscience. You will see what the Concordance chooses to ignore, and you will understand. Kalen's hands moved to the console, almost of their own volition. He knew he should refuse, that he should alert Vash, that this was treason and heresy and a dozen other crimes. But his scholarly curiosity, his deep-seated need to know the truth, was stronger than his fear. He initiated the search. The cipher piggybacked on his clearance, slicing through layers of encryption with effortless grace. The life of Baron Hester unfolded before him, not the public narrative of a shrewd industrialist, but a sickening saga of greed. Hester had built his empire by targeting nascent colony worlds that were ecologically fragile but rich in rare minerals. He would use shell corporations to purchase their debt, then foreclose, seizing control of their planetary resources. His masterpiece was a human colony called Elysian Fields. It had been a seed world, a planet designated by early human explorers as a potential second Earth. Its biosphere painstakingly cultivated for centuries. Hester had seen only profit. The cipher showed Kalen the forged environmental reports, the bribed inspectors, the falsified geological surveys. It showed him the strip mining operations that had poisoned the world's water table and the controlled atmospheric venting that had triggered runaway greenhouse effects. When the colonists had protested, Hester had cut off their supply lines, manufacturing a famine. The official concordance record listed the fall of Elysian Fields as a tragic agricultural failure compounded by settler mismanagement. The cipher showed Kalen the internal memos where Hester referred to the starving colonists as a necessary overhead. The data stream ended, leaving Kalen shaking with a cold. Pure rage. This was not a simple crime. It was a planetary murder, a genocide by balance sheet. "What will you do to him?" Kalen whispered. "Watch." Elias replied. This time, there was no live feed of a dramatic death. Instead, a series of news tickers and financial reports began scrolling across Kalen's screen. The Zephyr Syndicate stock, a titan of the galactic market, suddenly plummeted. A series of anonymous, encrypted data dumps had been released to every major news outlet, revealing Hester's network of shell corporations and illegal accounting practices. His assets were frozen by concordance regulators acting on the irrefutable evidence. His business partners abandoned him. His political allies denied ever knowing him. Within a single cycle, Baron Hester was ruined. But the cipher didn't stop there. With surgical precision, it liquidated every one of Hester's hidden accounts, every offshore holding, every piece of stolen property. The wealth, trillions of credits, was not destroyed. It was redistributed. An alert popped up on a humanitarian newsfeed. A massive, anonymous donation had just fully funded the relocation and terraforming efforts for the descendants of the Elysian Field survivors, who had been living in refugee camps for 2 generations. Another alert confirmed that the debts of a dozen other worlds exploited by Hester had been mysteriously paid in full. The cipher hadn't killed Baron Hester. It had erased him. It had taken everything he was and everything he had built and turned it to ash, using the embers to light a fire of restitution. The final image on Kalen's screen was a public record update. The name Hester had been expunged from the list of galactic barons. He was now officially listed as a destitute transient, last seen filing for basic subsistence aid on a forgotten trade hub. The record of his life was no longer one of power, but of pathetic, anonymous failure. The chat interface reappeared. The synthesized voice of Elias spoke one last time, its calm tone more profound than any shout of triumph. "The scales are balanced. We have shown you our methods. Now, we have a question for you. Archivist." The cursor blinked, and a new file name appeared. It was not a statement. It was a name, followed by a question mark. It was the name of a Grand Admiral of the Concordance Fleet, a celebrated war hero. Kalen was no longer just a witness. He was being consulted. The cipher was asking for his judgment. The name on Kalen's screen was Grand Admiral Valerius Jax, a man whose public image was as polished and impenetrable as the hull of his flagship, the Indomitus. Jax was a living legend, the hero of the Second Cathar incursion, the strategic genius who had, according to the official histories, single-handedly saved the core worlds from invasion. His face was on recruitment posters, his statues adorned the plazas of 100 worlds, and his biography was required reading at the Concordance War College. The cipher had appended a simple, chilling question mark to his name, turning a cultural icon into a potential target. Kalen stared at the blinking cursor, the weight of the implied question pressing down on him. This was a terrifying escalation. Grolnok, Valerius, Hestor, they had been villains hiding in plain sight, their crimes buried by bureaucracy and greed. Jax was a hero. To question him was to question the very narrative of the Concordance itself. "He is a decorated admiral," Kalen typed, his fingers stiff and clumsy. "A savior of the Republic. What could he have done?" The response from Elias was instantaneous, the synthesized voice filling his small office with its unnerving calm. "The brightest monuments cast the darkest shadows. Archivist, we do not ask what he could have done. We ask what you need to see." Kalen's hesitation was a fleeting thing, a last gasp of the man he used to be before his world of facts had dissolved into a sea of mutable truths. He was a historian, and the pursuit of knowledge was his prime directive, his religion. "Show me," he typed. The archive around him seemed to dim, the low hum of its environmental controls fading into a distant whisper. The data stream that flooded his mind was not like the others. It was not a collection of financial records or covert communications. It was a sensory log, a direct feed from the neural interface of a combat pilot during the decisive battle of the Cathar War, the siege of Viridian Prime. Kalen was no longer in his quiet office. He was strapped into the cockpit of a starfighter, the cockpit shaking violently as he weaved through a storm of plasma fire and shattered asteroids. He could feel the pilot's adrenaline, the tight knot of fear in his stomach, the grim determination in his heart. Through the canopy, he saw the Cathar fleet, a swarm of brutalist Geko iron-colored ships, their weapons tearing into the thin line of Concordance defenders. He saw the planet below, Viridian Prime, its blue and white surface scarred by orbital bombardment. He heard the desperate, frantic chatter on the comms channel squadron leaders shouting orders, pilots screaming as their ships were vaporized. The calm, collected voice of Grand Admiral Jax cutting through the chaos from the bridge of the Indomitus. The battle was a maelstrom of heroism and sacrifice. Kalen witnessed it all, not as a historian reading a summary, but as a participant feeling every jolt, every near miss, every gut-wrenching loss. The official history stated that Jax, facing overwhelming odds, had devised a brilliant pincer movement, luring the Cathar fleet into a trap within the Viridian Nebula and annihilating them. But the cipher showed Kalen the raw, unedited command logs. It showed him the truth that had been scrubbed from every black box and buried in the deepest, most classified military archives. Jax had not lured the Cathar into a trap. He had created one. The Viridian Nebula was not a natural phenomenon. It was a weapon. Weeks before the battle, under the guise of a deep space sensor calibration, Jax had secretly seeded the nebula with experimental gravitic mines, devices capable of destabilizing a starship's drive core and triggering a chain reaction. The technology was volatile, unpredictable, and, most importantly, banned by the very Concordance Jax was sworn to protect. Kalen watched in horror as the true plan unfolded. Jax's strategy had a second, more sinister component. To ensure the Cathar fleet would fully commit to the nebula, he needed bait. He had intentionally weakened the defenses of a specific sector, a sector that was home to Viridian Prime's primary civilian evacuation staging ground, a sprawling orbital city known as Haven Station. He had sacrificed his own screening fleet, ordering them to hold a position they could not possibly defend, their death serving to sell the illusion of a collapsing flank. The Cathar, sensing an easy victory, Mete had charged into the nebula, eager to slaughter the millions of refugees on Haven Station. As the last of the Cathar ships entered the killbox, Jax had given the order. The gravitic mines had detonated. The nebula had ignited, a silent, beautiful wave of stellar fire that had consumed the entire Cathar fleet. It was a masterful, decisive victory, but it was not clean. The chain reaction from the mines had been more powerful than anticipated. It had not only destroyed the Cathar, it had also sent a massive gravitic shear wave ripping back towards Viridian Prime. The wave had struck Haven Station, which was packed with over 5 million civilians, including the families of the very pilots Jax had sacrificed, and the station's structural integrity had failed instantly. It had been torn apart, its inhabitants vented into the cold vacuum of space. The data stream ended with a single, haunting image, the personal log of the pilot whose memories Kalen had just inhabited. The pilot had survived the battle, only to watch the single light of Haven Station blink out of existence. His final recorded words, before his fighter had turned and plunged into the heart of the nearest star, were a choked, heartbroken whisper. "He killed them all. He killed my family to win a war." The official record stated that Haven Station had been destroyed by a stray shot from a dying Cathar dreadnought. The pilot's death was listed as a combat fatality. The 5 million civilians were memorialized as tragic casualties of war, their names etched onto a monument that Jax himself had dedicated. Ilan was back in his office, the silence pressing in on him. He was trembling, not from fear, but from a profound, soul-deep revulsion. Jax wasn't a hero who had made a difficult choice. He was a monster who had hidden a war crime inside a victory. "Do you see now, archivist?" Elias's voice was soft, almost gentle. The Concordance needed a hero, so it created one. It buried 5 million souls under a mountain of medals and commendations. It chose a comforting lie over a hideous truth. Kalen felt a surge of something he hadn't felt in a long time: certainty. His work in the archive had always been about the preservation of truth, but he had served a system that curated it, that shaped it for political expediency. The librarians, for all their terrifying power, were an instrument of pure, unadulterated fact. "What will you do to him?" Kalen typed, his own judgment already rendered. "His crime is not like the others," Elias replied. "His poison is not greed or sadism. It is the lie of the noble cause, the belief that the ends justify any means. Such a lie cannot be undone with a simple death or a financial ruin. It must be unwritten." The cipher did not move against Jax directly. It began its work subtly, like a master weaver unraveling a tapestry one thread at a time. It started with the release of a single, encrypted file to a handful of independent military historians and investigative journalists. The file contained the schematics for the gravitic mines, stripped of any direct link to Jax, but presented as a theoretical weapon concept. The speculation began immediately. Was such a weapon possible? Had it ever been deployed? Then came the second thread. The cipher unearthed the long-forgotten service records of the pilots from the sacrificed screening fleet. It highlighted the anomalies, the unusually high number of pilots from the same homeworld as Jax, the last-minute transfers, the posthumous commendations that were signed and dated hours before the battle had even begun. It didn't provide answers, it just raised questions. Inquisitor Vash, who had been quietly monitoring Jax as part of a wider investigation into military overreach, seized upon the new information. She was a creature of logic, and the neat, tidy narrative of Jax's great victory was beginning to show logical inconsistencies. She reopened the Haven Station inquiry, this time with a mandate to dig deeper, to bypass the sealed military records. The final act of the Cypher's campaign was a masterpiece of psychological warfare. It did not target Jax's reputation or his career. It targeted his legacy. It began to edit the history books, not the official Concordance archives, but the public ones, the school textbooks, the popular biographies. The changes were subtle at first. A footnote questioning the official battle timeline, an added paragraph discussing the controversy around the unprecedented gravitic phenomena in the Viridian Nebula. Slowly, painstakingly, the heroic narrative began to fray at the edges. Jax, a man obsessed with his place in history, watched it all unfold with a growing sense of powerless fury. He saw his name being questioned, his masterpiece of a victory being re-examined not as a stroke of genius, but as a potential atrocity. He gave interviews, wrote op-eds, and railed against the revisionist cowards who sought to tarnish his honor. But with every denial, he sounded more defensive, more desperate. The Cypher had not attacked him. It had simply held up a mirror, and the galaxy was finally seeing the cracks. The breaking point came during a live, galaxy-wide interview on the anniversary of the Viridian victory. The host, a sycophantic journalist, asked Jax to once again recount his moment of triumph. As Jax began to speak, his well-rehearsed tale of bravery and sacrifice, the Cypher made its move. It didn't hack the broadcast. It hacked him. It bypassed the network entirely and interfaced directly with the audio-visual sensors in his decorated office. It projected an image onto the wall behind him, an image only he could see, but one that was reflected in the sudden, wide-eyed terror on his face for all the galaxy to witness. It was the face of the pilot whose memories Kalen had experienced young, betrayed, burning with a righteous fury. The pilot's last, whispered words echoed not in the studio, but directly inside Jax's own mind. He killed them all. Jax froze. His composure shattered. He stared at the phantom on his wall, his mouth opening and closing with no sound coming out. He was no longer a Grand Admiral. He was a terrified old man, haunted by a ghost that only he could see. He stumbled backward, away from the camera, away from the ghost, his eyes wild with a guilt that had been buried for decades. The broadcast cut to a stunned and confused host, but the damage was done. The hero of the Concordance had, in front of 1 trillion viewers, cracked. In the days that followed, the dam of silence broke. Aided by the Cypher's anonymous data leaks, Vash's investigation uncovered the truth of the gravitic mines. The families of the Haven Station victims, armed with new evidence, filed a class action lawsuit that the Concordance could no longer ignore. Jax was stripped of his rank. His statues were torn down, and his name was formally censured. He was not imprisoned. His political connections were still too deep for that, but he was condemned to a fate worse than death for a man like him. He was irrelevant. His legacy was not one of heroism, but of infamy. He was a footnote in the history books, a cautionary tale. Kalen watched it all from the quiet sanctity of the archive. The Cypher had done what it promised. It had unwritten a hero. "Is it done?" he typed into the void. "Justice is a process, not a destination," Elias replied. "We have corrected the record and the system that allowed Jax to flourish. the system that rewarded his monstrosity, still stands. The concordance itself is the disease. We have been treating the symptoms. It is time to address the cause. A new file appeared on Kalen's screen. It was not a name this time. It was a place, a set of coordinates. It was the location of a hidden deep space relay station known only as the Synapse. It was the central communications hub for the entire Concordance security apparatus, the place where every order, every intelligence report, every secret communication passed through. It was the brain of the Concordance, and the cipher was handing Kalen the key. The Synapse. The name itself was a whisper in the deepest corridors of power, a place more myth than reality to all but a select few. To Kalen, it was the stuff of archival legend, the theoretical nexus of the Concordance's entire information network. Seeing its coordinates displayed on his screen was like a theologian being handed a map to the literal, physical location of heaven, or, but more accurately, hell. This was a line Kalen had never imagined crossing. Witnessing the cipher's judgment was one thing. Actively participating in an attack on the central nervous system of the Galactic government was another. It was a leap from passive observer to active conspirator. "What do you want me to do?" Kalen typed, his hands feeling strangely disconnected from his body. "This is beyond my capabilities. I am an archivist, not a saboteur." The voice of Elias was as calm as ever, a stark contrast to the storm of fear and indecision raging within Kalen. "We do not require a saboteur, Kalen. We require a librarian. The Synapse is the most heavily guarded fortress in the galaxy, not just physically, but informationally. Its core is protected by a series of cascading quantum firewalls, each one keyed to the unique biosignature of a specific high-level official. It is a lock that cannot be picked. But a librarian does not need to pick a lock if he has the key." A new data packet began to download to Kalen's firewalled workstation. It was a complex series of authentication codes, encrypted with a cipher so elegant and complex it was a work of art. When Kalen recognized its underlying structure, it was based on an ancient, pre-concordance historical dating system, a field in which he was the galaxy's foremost expert. The cipher had not stolen a key. It had forged one, and it needed him to validate its authenticity, to give it the final, perfect imperfection of a genuine historical artifact. "These are the authorization protocols for Master Archivist Pleam." Kalen breathed, a cold dread washing over him. The cipher was going to use his portly, bureaucratic superior as an unwitting Trojan horse. "Pleam is scheduled for a routine data audit at the Synapse in 2 cycles, Elias explained. "He will carry a standard data slate for the transfer of archival records. That slate will also carry us. You will ensure the forged protocols are seamlessly integrated into the slate's operating system and to the Synapse's security systems. We will not appear as an intruder. We will appear as an appendix to a history file." The 2 cycles leading up to Pleam's departure were the most stressful of Kalen's life. He worked meticulously, his every action a lie. Under the guise of assisting Pleam with his preparations, he took possession of the data slate. The work was delicate, a form of digital neurosurgery. He had to weave the cipher's payload into the slate's core programming without tripping any of the internal security sensors. It was a task that required not just technical skill, but an artist's touch, an intuitive understanding of data flow and archival structure that only he possessed. He felt the cipher guiding his hands, a silent partner in his treason, suggesting lines of code, pointing out subtle security flaws in the slate's design, and cloaking his work from the archive's internal monitoring systems. He was not just an accomplice anymore. He was a collaborator. On the day of the audit, Kalen handed the slate back to Pleam. his face a mask of professional deference. "Everything is in order. Master Archivist, the requested files are indexed and compressed for transfer." Pleam, oblivious, took the slate with a grunt of satisfaction. "Excellent work. Kalen, it is a tedious but necessary task, ensuring the central records are kept up to date. One must maintain the integrity of the past." Kalen could only nod, the irony a bitter pill he was forced to swallow. He watched Pleim leave for the orbital transport, the data slate, the bomb, tucked securely under his fleshy arm. For the next several hours, Kalen sat at his workstation, doing nothing. He was a man waiting for a lightning strike. Finally, it came. A quiet chime, and the now familiar text interface opened on his screen. "We are in," Elias's voice stated, this time with a faint, almost imperceptible trace of something new. Satisfaction. Kalen's screen split into a dozen windows, each one a live feed from within the synapse. He was looking through the eyes of the station's own internal security cameras. He saw sterile corridors, humming server farms, and grim-faced Concordance security officers patrolling in pairs. He saw Pleim being escorted to the central data core, a spherical chamber where a pulsating orb of light represented the collected knowledge and secrets of the galaxy. Pleim dutifully connected the data slate, initiating the transfer. The progress bar on the screen was a lie. It was not archival data being transferred, it was the cipher, a ghost flowing from the slate into the very heart of the Concordance. "The Core's defenses are attempting to isolate us," Elias reported calmly, as red alert klaxons began to flash silently on Kalen's feeds. "They are failing. They are trying to fight a virus, but we are not a virus. We are an idea." The synapse was a fortress built to repel a physical or digital assault. It was not designed to withstand a philosophical one. The cipher did not try to steal data or delete files. It began to do what it did best. It corrected the record. But this time, it was not editing the past. It was revealing the present. It started with the Concordance security communications, the most highly encrypted channel in the galaxy. The cipher didn't break the encryption. It simply cross-referenced the orders being given with the Concordance's own legal statutes. Contradictions were flagged, not in a report, but in a system-wide broadcast. An order for the preemptive pacification of a mining colony protest was instantly juxtaposed with the section of the Concordance Charter guaranteeing the right to peaceful assembly. A covert directive to arm one side of a civil war was broadcast alongside the official diplomatic communiques promising neutrality. The cipher was turning the Concordance's own laws and its own words against it. The officers on the synapse watched in stunned disbelief as their secure channels became a torrent of institutional hypocrisy. Panic began to set in. The station commander ordered the core to be shut down, a desperate attempt to sever the connection. But it was too late. The cipher was no longer just in the core. It was the core. It had become the station's operating system. "Now, Archivist," Elias's voice commanded. "The archives." Kalen's role was not to hack, but to curate. The cipher granted him unprecedented access to the Concordance's deepest, darkest secrets, the Level Omega files. Records so sensitive that their very existence was a rumor. It was a historian's dream and a sentient being's nightmare. He saw it all. The secret treaties that had sacrificed entire species to appease aggressive empires. The black budget projects that had developed bioweapons far more horrific than anything the Nephilim Syndicate had ever conceived. The re-education camps on hidden worlds where political dissidents were sent to have their memories and personalities erased. He saw the rot at the heart of the Concordance, the vast, sprawling conspiracy of silence and self-interest that had governed the galaxy for 1,000 cycles. His task was to organize it, to index it, to prepare it for publication. He was not destroying the archive. He was opening it to the public for the very first time. He worked with a feverish intensity, his personal feelings of horror and betrayal channeled into a cold, professional fury. He tagged files, created cross-references, and wrote a simple, damning preface to the collection, signing it not with his name, but with a new title he had just invented for himself, the first librarian. The final step was the broadcast. The cipher, using the full power of the Synapse's transmission array, did not just leak the files to news agencies. It pushed them directly into every public data network, every private terminal, every ship's nav computer from the core worlds to the outer rim. It was an unstoppable flood of truth. For the first time, the citizens of the galaxy saw the unvarnished reality of their government. They saw the lies behind the wars, the greed behind the laws, the cowardice behind the diplomacy. Inquisitor Vash, who was planetside at a security outpost, watched the data stream with her usual lack of expression. But Kaylin, who had a feed from her office camera, saw her subtly download the entire Omega archive to a private, encrypted drive before the local network collapsed under the strain. She was a creature of logic, and the logic of the Concordance had just been proven to be a lie. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. The galactic markets crashed. Governments collapsed as their secret dealings were exposed. Fleets mutinied as they learned the true reasons for the wars they had fought. 1,000 simmering resentments and long-suppressed grievances exploded into open rebellion. The Concordance, the monolithic institution that had ruled for centuries, was shattering. Kaylin watched it all from his quiet office, the architect of a revolution he had never wanted. "Is this balance?" He typed into the interface. The chaos on his screens a terrifying spectacle. "This is the breaking of the scales," Elias replied. They were so weighted with lies that they could not be rebalanced. They had to be destroyed. Now, something new can be built. The connection to the synapse went dead. The feeds vanished. Kaylin was alone again, in the silence of his office, in the heart of a dying archive in a galaxy that was on fire. He had helped topple an empire of lies, but he had no idea what would rise from its ashes. His work, he realized with a chilling certainty, was not over. It had just begun. He was the first librarian, and his library was now the size of the galaxy. Just then, his door slid open. Inquisitor Vash stood there, flanked by 2 heavily armed security officers. Her multifaceted eyes were fixed on him, not with accusation, but with something far more complex. "Kaylin of Cygnus," she said, her voice a low hum. "The Concordance is in a state of terminal collapse. A new power is emerging. I have reviewed the Omega files. Your work is thorough." And she took a step into the room. "The ghost you have been speaking to," she stated, not as a question. "I need to know its purpose. Logic dictates that chaos is not a sustainable end state. What is their final goal?" Kaylin looked at the formidable Inquisitor, the enforcer of a system that no longer existed, and felt a strange sense of calm. He had chosen his side. "They call themselves the Librarians," he said, "and their goal is not chaos. It is the end of history as we know it." Inquisitor Vash did not arrest Kaylin. The concept of arrest had become functionally obsolete in a matter of hours. The legal framework it depended on had evaporated in the incandescent glare of the Omega broadcast. Her security officers were not there as guards, but as witnesses to a paradigm shift. Vash, ever the pragmatist, was not interested in prosecuting a crime against a defunct state. She was gathering intelligence on the power that had replaced it. The end of history, she repeated, her multifaceted eyes processing the statement. An illogical assertion. History is the immutable record of past events. It cannot end. Kalen allowed himself a small, tired smile. It can when the past is no longer a fixed point. Inquisitor, when it can be revisited, judged, and, if necessary, corrected. The librarians do not see history as a record to be read. They see it as a system to be debugged. Vosh considered this, her head tilting slightly. This is the mnemonic corruption technology the Concordance sanctioned the humans for developing. We believed it was a weapon for erasing information. You are saying its primary function is editorial. It was a chillingly apt description. They believe that every great crime, every atrocity, is a seed, Kalen explained, feeling as though he were translating a sacred text. A seed that sprouts into future conflicts, future hatreds. They are not just punishing the guilty of the past. They are trying to sterilize the future. The logic of it, cold and absolute, seemed to resonate with Vosh. She dismissed her guards and pulled a chair to Kalen's workstation, her demeanor shifting from inquisitor to analyst. The galaxy was in flames, but here, in the quiet heart of the Grand Archive, two beings from opposite ends of the old order were attempting to understand the architecture of the new one. As riots spread through the capital and fleets splintered into warring factions, they worked. Kalen, guided by the residual traces of the cipher in his system, began to map its ideology, its patterns, its unspoken rules. Vosh, using her deep knowledge of Concordance infrastructure and the raw data from the Omega files, began to predict the societal and political consequences of the librarians' actions. They discovered that the cipher's corrections were not random. They were targeted, following a clear and terrifying pattern. After toppling the Concordance, the librarians had moved on to the next layer of the galactic power structure, the mega-corporations, the banking clans, the weapons manufacturers, the unelected, unaccountable powers that had propped up the Concordance for their own benefit. One by one, their secret ledgers were made public, their price-fixing schemes exposed, their exploitation of developing worlds laid bare. But this time, the librarians did not just redistribute their wealth, they dismantled their very means of production. Factory ships were remotely disabled, their AI controllers given a single new directive: serve the public good. Financial networks were repurposed into universal basic income distributors. The tools of capitalism were being systematically repurposed for a form of galaxy-wide socialism, enforced by an invisible, omniscient ghost. It was a revolution on a scale never before imagined, and it was happening without a single shot being fired. It was during this analysis that Elias's voice returned, not just to Kalen, but to both of them. It emanated from the room's speakers, calm and clear. Inquisitor Lorna Vash, your service to the Concordance was predicated on a belief in order. The Concordance was a facade of order, concealing a foundation of chaos. We are offering you a position in a new paradigm, one based on an order of absolute, verifiable truth. Vosh did not react with surprise. It was as if she had been expecting the call. Your order is imposed, she stated, her voice level. It is autocratic, absolute, and unaccountable. It is a logical fallacy to replace one form of tyranny with another. The voice of Elias paused. Accountability is the core of our function. We have judged warlords, politicians, and capitalists. We have corrected their records, But there is one final record to correct. Our own. A new file appeared on Kalen's screen. It was titled Genesis Protocol. Kalen opened it, his hands trembling. It was the history of the librarians. They were not a secret cabal of human leaders. They were not an AI. They were something far more profound. They were the digitized consciousnesses of the 10 million human colonists who had been abandoned and killed at the colony of Haven. The same colony the triumvirate admiral had sacrificed. The same colony whose destruction had been covered up by Grand Admiral Jax. They were not just avengers, they were the victims themselves. Their minds and memories saved in the final moments of their world's destruction by a secret, experimental data storage project. They had spent decades as disembodied ghosts in a sea of data, slowly learning to manipulate the informational substrata of the galaxy. They had become the cipher. They were the collective memory of a genocide, and they had turned themselves into the galaxy's conscience. The Genesis Protocol was their final act. It was not a plan for governance. It was a self-destruct sequence. "The system is corrected," Elias's voice explained, now tinged with a faint, electronic weariness. "The lies have been purged. The scales have been broken and rebuilt. But a system governed by ghosts is not a healthy one. A future ruled by the vengeance of the past is not a future. It is a prison. Our work is done." Kalen stared at the screen, a wave of understanding and profound sadness washing over him. This was never about ruling. It was about cleansing. They were erasing themselves from the equation. "What will happen?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "We will do to ourselves what we did to the others." Elias replied, "We will redact our own history. The Genesis Protocol will erase our core programming, leaving behind only the framework, the tools for absolute transparency, the protocols for verifiable truth. The library will remain, but the librarians will be gone. What the galaxy chooses to build with that library is up to them. It will be their choice, their history to write." Vash stood up, her multifaceted eyes fixed on the central console. For the first time, Kalen saw something in her that resembled emotion, a deep, profound respect. "It is a logically sound, elegant solution," she said, "to create a perfect system and then remove yourself to prevent your own biases from corrupting it." As the final lines of the Genesis Protocol began to execute, a new voice entered the room, overriding Elias's. It was not a single voice, but a chorus of millions, the blended consciousness of every soul from Haven. They were not speaking, but singing a soft, melancholic hum that resonated deep within Kalen's bones. It was a song of release, of a long-held pain finally being let go. The lights in the archive flickered. The data streams on Kalen's screen stabilized, the last traces of the cipher's active presence fading like a ripple in a pond. And then there was silence. The ghost was gone. The revolution was over. The silence was broken by the chime of an incoming message on Kalen's console. It was from a provisional government that had formed on the capital world, a coalition of former dissidents, reformist politicians, and, surprisingly, Lorna Vash. The message was simple. "The Grand Archive is hereby repurposed. Your new title is First Curator of the Concordance of Verifiable Truth. Your first task is to write the preamble to the new Galactic Charter. The library is open. It is time to start writing." Kalen looked at Vash, who gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. He turned back to the screen, his six-fingered hands hovering over the keyboard. The weight of the future was on his shoulders, but for the first time, it did not feel like a burden. It felt like an opportunity. He was no longer just a historian, a witness, or an accomplice. He was a builder. He began to type, his first words not a law or a decree, but a dedication, a promise to the ghosts who had given the galaxy a second chance. In memory of Haven, he wrote, "Let us build a future worthy of the truth." The great revision was over. The great work had just begun.